On today's Technobabble, camera placement for live video production.
This is Tech No Babble, your weekly source for church video and graphics news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. And now here's your host, Paul Clifford.
Hi, and welcome again to Technobabble. This is the show where every week I help you with church video and graphic design. I almost forgot what show this was just for a second. My name is Paul Allen Clifford. So, we're in a series all about live production as I adjust my microphone. Sorry, things like that happen. And I was thinking, what haven't I covered yet? And there's something coming up I'm directing in a couple of weeks at church, and I have some ideas of some stuff that I want to show you then, but it occurred to me that I haven't really touched on camera placement. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of the considerations that I would think of when I'm coming to place the cameras, whether it's a temporary situation or a long-term placement. First off, I'm going to consider how many cameras I have. The more cameras I have, the more flexibility I can bring to bear, so that really affects placement. Secondly, I'm going to think about the rules that I do not want to break. Rule number one that I absolutely don't want to break is the 180 rule. Sometimes my church breaks this and I try and dissuade them, but that is the rule that for every camera, there is a line 180 degrees that if you switch to a shot on that side of the line, imagine that the subject has a line going through their head perpendicular to the camera. If you run into that, if you have that imaginary line running perpendicular through the subject's head, the next shot can be anywhere on any side of that line, but not on the opposite side of the line because it's visually confusing to switch. Now, you can either move the camera while it's live around the line. That's permissible because your brain can go, oh, okay, that's why the singer's ponytail is on the right instead of the left. That's permissible. Also, you can slowly switch because every time that you switch to a different camera, you get a new 180 degree rule. So if you go 30 degrees to the right and then another 30 degrees to the right, the line has shifted, so it's less of an issue, less of a problem for you to consider. So that's something else for you to think about as you're placing your cameras. You don't want to place a camera immediately behind the pastor, for example, shooting out into the audience very often. There are exceptions, but in general, you just don't want to do that. Okay, next thing to consider is the 30-degree rule. Now, the 180 rule, 30-degree rule. 30-degree rule says that when you're switching between cameras, you need to allow, I say 30 degrees, but it's actually just 30. 30 degrees, 30%. It needs to be a difference of at least that much between camera shots. So you can have two cameras that are, 15 degrees apart from one another, as long as one is a much wider shot and one is a much closer shot. So there's 30% difference between the two camera shots. You can have two cameras that have the exact same shot. Let's say you have a 55 millimeter lens. I'm looking at an 18 to 55 in my Canon DSLR here, and let's say you've got a 55 millimeter lens on two different cameras. They're both they're both 18 to 55s, for example, and they're both wide, but they're more than 30 degrees apart. Also permissible. So those are a couple of the differences, a couple of the things to consider. Now, also consider, when you're considering how many cameras you have, how can you get the best coverage? So if you have only 2 cameras, maybe you want to put one in the back, straight in front of the subject, but maybe you want to put another one 30 degrees off axis so you can get some different shots of worship and different shots of the pastor, etc. Now, if you have 3 cameras, maybe you want to put 2 towards the center, a close follow and a wide follow, and you want to put the third on the floor in front of the riser, the podium, whatever you call it, the stage, close to the lectern, close to the pulpit, whatever it is. So maybe you want to put one there, and then that way the person on the third camera can get shots of the worship team or shots of the piano, etc., during the musical portion of the service. So that way you'll get better coverage to have a greater variety of shots. So those are some of the things that I would consider. I'd also consider just how can I get the most variety? Now, I'm talking primarily, so far I've been talking about putting cameras all on tripods or fixed in their location. But if you have enough cameras and you have enough budget, maybe instead of having all these cameras in fixed locations, maybe you want to put one on a jib, maybe you want to put one on a dolly, so that you can get more variety moving the cameras around and getting more information. That's really what the art of directing is about, is getting coverage of all the possible visual information of what's going on and doing so in a way that's really the most engaging. Now, one final thing that I would consider is elevation of the cameras. If possible, what you want to do is, and some people will disagree with me on this, and I don't care, I've done this for a while. If possible, generally speaking, you want the camera to be on the same level as the eyes of the subject or slightly below. Now, why is that the case? It's actually very simple. You looking at me, if you're looking through a camera instead of listening to the audio podcast, if you're looking at me through the camera, you don't know how tall the camera is. Now, if we were sitting across from one another, you would know, okay, I'm about the same height as Paul. Now, I'm 6'2", so maybe in real life you're 5'5". Maybe you're shorter than that. Maybe you're taller than me. Maybe you're 6'7", maybe you're 7 feet tall, something like that. If any of those are the case, then how we relate is different, just based on the fact that I would need to either look up to you if you're taller than me, literally look up, or look down to you if you're shorter than me. But looking through a camera lens, you don't know that. So what happens psychologically when you put a camera underneath the subject is they appear more authoritative. Because when did you look up at everyone? When you were a child. When everyone had more authority than you. So when you're shooting your pastor, generally speaking, you don't want to look down on your pastor. You want to look up to the pastor or look the pastor straight in the eyes. A lot of churches get this wrong and put their cameras up on the balconies where they're out of the way, and they make psychologically speaking, they make the pastor's message seem less important because you don't know how high you are. All you know is what you're seeing, and when you're looking down on someone, it could be that this person is actually in real life 7 feet tall and you're actually in real life 5'5". If that's the case, in real life you would be looking up to this person, but through the camera you're looking down on them. Literally, not metaphorically, but from a psychological sense, it will feel the same. So you need to consider what happens if you have to put cameras in a more elevated position. Try and dangle them down with some support so that they can get a more straight on shot. That would be ideal. Even more ideal, bringing the cameras much closer, but almost no churches do that, so we won't even go into there. If you like this content, you would like my email newsletter, so head on over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/newsletter, and I'll send you all sorts of church tech tips and tricks, along with a free subscription to my email newsletter and some freebies that you'll see when you subscribe. Until next time, this is Paul Allen Clifford with TrinityDigitalMedia.com. Go out and change eternity.